fact that those are the people who want to be here for him speaks well of him.
Yeah,
also.
exactly. I mean, I did a podcast with Backstrom the other day on Monday, and it's funny, a couple of my friends of mine, like, how come you picked the Finnish guy with a thick accent to do a podcast with and not Nick Schultz or Kyle Brodziak or Gabby or somebody? And it's just because I have always found Nicholas Backstrom to be one of the most interesting, fascinating people I've ever covered. If you listen through his accent, this is one intelligent person. Yep. And I used to it was my favorite thing in the world. There's something about goalies I've always, whether it was Luongo down in Florida or Mikey Vernon or Beezer or here, whether it was Doobie or Stalock or Backstrom, I just have always loved shooting the breeze with goaltenders. But he's one that, from the first time, I even brought it up on the podcast with him, and my first time I ever went out with him away from the rink, I did an interview. They were practicing at Parade Ice Garden, and I said, hey, nobody knows who you were. Last year you led the league in goals against average and save percentage, but yet nobody knows you. Can we go to lunch and do a story? And he's like, yeah, where do you want to go? And I said, let's go to the International Market Square, which is right around the corner from Parade, to that D'Amico and Sons in there. It's just this, it's like their unique D'Amico where it's like a salad bar and it's in the middle of this, industrial building of businesses and things like that. So I sit down with him, and I was just blown away even then when his English wasn't great, how smart he was. And from that point on, I've just loved talking to him. So it was really cool sitting down with him. It was always good talking to guys like Schultz and Brodzy. Schultz is that person I've always told you. For as long as I covered the Minnesota Wild and Nick Schultz was on it, you felt like he was an ally, like if you walked in that locker room and you knew you've ticked off about 10 people with things that you wrote that day, you'd walk in that locker room and you could go by Nick Schultz's stall and you just knew you had a friendly face there to just kind of use as a security blanket while 15 other players were staring daggers at you, wanting to kick you out of the room. And so, the guy's unbelievable. Last night I go to Suite 55 appropriately, which was the suite that their pre-party was in during the game. And I go in there, and Jared Spurgeon is in there, and Jared. So I call Nick to go talk to him, and Jared and Nick and Ryan Carter and me and Parrish are all just shooting the breeze by the door. And if you remember, I've told this story a gazillion times, but at the Matt Cullen 1,000th game party, it was at the Downtowner in downtown St. Paul. And after the Wild game that night, I happened to go to Tom Reed's just to go hang out with a couple of the sports writers, and it's the same parking lot. So I'm backing out of my space at like midnight to drive home, and I'm like, boom, hit something, and I'm like, oh no, and I get out and hey Father, how are you? I get out and I look, and the first thing I see is a Porsche. So right away, I know there are 1,000 game parties going on across the street. So I'm like, oh no, that I just know that I hit it. And this is I don't know if you remember this time when Matt Cullen played his 1,000th game, but they were just going, they either came back or were going on their father-son trip that they got destroyed on in Philadelphia and Toronto. And the team was playing like absolute crap. And so everybody just didn't like me on the team right there. And so I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, please, like, I hope it's like, I'm thinking of like right in my head, like the player that I hope that Porsche belongs to, and then I'm thinking like the guys I really pray to God it isn't. And the first person I see is, as I'm inspecting the damage to the front end of this Porsche, is Jared Spurgeon and his dad, Barry. And I'm like, and Jared is just like almost looking at me blank face, like, oh my God, you just hit a teammate's car. And then he almost had a grin, like he was excited about it. And I'm like, I go to him, I'm like, do you know whose car this is? And in my gut, I'm just like, please say Nick Schultz or Matt Cullen or somebody. And he's like, I think that's Schultz's. And then he's like, yeah, that's Schultz's. I'm like, and then he looks at me and goes, I'll go get him. and he's like, it's like 12 o'clock, 12:30 in the morning, and he's running across 7th, and it is pitch black out. And he almost it was like almost slow motion. I'm like, Spurge. And I'm now alone with his dad, which is even more awkward. And I go, Spurge. And he turns around and he goes like, what? In the middle of 7th. Like he could have been smoked by a truck. And I go, don't make a scene. Like don't go in there and scream, Russo hit Schultz's car. Come out here. So I'm having the most uncomfortable shooting the breeze with with Jared Spurgeon's dad that you could ever even imagine.
So, you ever had a Porsche?
Yeah, I'm like, how are you? What do you think of that road trip you were just on where the team just got destroyed? And so, sorry, I got distracted by a text that we'll have to deal with. That never happens. So all of a sudden, I hear kind of giggling as two people are crossing the street, and then I look and it's Schultz with a smile on his face, and he swore in his heart of hearts that Spurge is playing a practical joke on him, and then he sees it. And he just looks at me and he just goes, "Go home." And I'm like, Nick, I just kind of banged up. It wasn't terrible damage, but I'm like, it's a Porsche, and I scratched up his car. And he's just like, "Go home." And I'm like, "Are you sure?" And he's like, "Yeah, just don't worry about it. Go home." And so I go home, and for the next month, I'm asking him every time, "Did you get it looked at? Did you get it looked at?" He's like, "Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it." I remember we were in Denver soon after that, and I told him, I'm like, "Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you a month of immunity. Even if as long as you don't turn the puck over for the game-losing goal in overtime, you could do whatever you want bad in a game, and I will not even point it out." And but the reason why I bring this whole story up is that last night Koivu's party was at the Downtowner, and Nick Schultz is coincidentally here, and he remembers it, and he said, and I'm here. I'm with Spurge, who witnessed this transgression of mine, and Schultz had the joke. He goes, "Yeah, I rented the car. I rented a car for this event, but I got the extra insurance." So. It was just really funny. So Nick Schultz, great guy.
Yeah. I love that story. Yeah. I got to do some business. I have a question for you about Gaborik and maybe another question about Koivu. By the way, we do have the microphone next to Brandon. If you'd like to ask a question, just come on up anytime, and we will get to you. I do want to thank our primary sponsor, Twill in the Edina Galleria, twillmn.com. I bought this winter cap. It's got fold-down ears. It's got insulation. It's the perfect winter cap. I love this there. Bought this shirt there. Bought these boots there. I spent, as I always tell Scott, I like going in and spending my own money. It's not a trade deal. I spend my own money there because I love the product and I love the people there. So twillmn.com. I'm here with my wife, Stacy. We went to Twill in the Edina Galleria the other day. We saw Scott Dayton, and I bought the nicest sport jacket I've ever owned, the most comfortable pants I've ever owned. They're Brax. A nice pair of loafers that I can wear to the ballpark. I think they're called Tracks. And I bought a bunch of Stenstrom short sleeve shirts to go with my Stenstrom nice dress shirts. And, I used to wear just disposable clothes. Now when I buy something, I buy it at Twill. I know it's going to last me the rest of my life, and it's going to be comfortable.
And on top of that, it's not just the best stuff you've ever had, but it's really everyday things that you can wear and that will fit all occasions.
Twill in the Edina Galleria, twillmn.com, Twill on Instagram. So Gaborik was giving you a lot of grief yesterday. I mean, we're all, 8 of us walk up to Gaborik for this little powwow by the elevator in the press box, and he immediately just starts laying into Russo with a smile on his face, but he was getting into you. Yeah,
he did the old... Russo, are you still here? Are you going to write a positive story for a change or something like that? Yeah. It was great seeing Marion. Marion's last year, what's funny is I almost wanted to say to him afterwards, and I saw him again down at the suite, and it was fine. But I didn't want to say, I'm like, I could off the top of my head think of about 20 great positive stories I wrote about you personally. One where I went to his home. It was a really cool story, actually. It was one of the first times I've ever gone to a player's home to do a big story, and he allowed me. He was lived by the Walker Arts Center at the time, and in one of those buildings where it was really neat. You take an elevator up and it opens and you're in his place. It was really cool. And I did a story. I should find it. It was a really cool story. I did a story he had this crazy arcade game simulator where he could do Formula One racing in a simulator in one of his rooms and things like that. But the story was, it started, we went to, coincidentally, a D'Amico and Son right there on Hennepin in Uptown, or almost in Uptown. And I went with, I think it was Carlos Gonzalez. And
there's a photographer and the lead guitarist in my band.
Yeah, and Pavel Dimitra, and Branko Radivojevic. And it was the Slovak Mafia, and Carlos and me. And we're in this D'Amico Sun at lunch hour on I'm pretty sure a weekday, packed. We have a photographer taking pictures, and nobody's even looking or bothering us. And I'm just like, wow, this is interesting. State of hockey, and Marian Gaborik and Pavel Demitra, one of the greatest Slovak players ever, is sitting right here, and nobody's even bothering him. I just thought it was kind of neat. And then we went to his house and continued the story. So that's one positive story, Gabby, that I wrote about.
They only remember the bad stories.
And the other cool story, a player in the league called me today because he saw Dan Meyer's tweet about it. He thought and wanted to know if it was real. If Gabby was being joking or not, and I said to him, I said, there was definitely something there. There's no doubt about it. All jokes have a little truth to it, right? And he's tense, and I'll tell the reason why he's tense after this. But this player said, you know what? The one thing I know from playing is you only read the stories when you screw up and not when you're getting praise. Like,
right.
A lot of times it's like, I'll score the game-winning goal in overtime and will not even think of picking up the paper the next day. But if I turn the puck over for loss, I want to see what that guy wrote about me. And he goes, I think Gabby was a lot like that, where he didn't read when he, had the really good games and things like that. But one of the other cool stories that I ever did that I still get goosebumps thinking about it is, and I wanted to do this with Ryan Poehling actually this summer, but it didn't work out that way. But after Gabby had the 5-goal game against the Rangers here at XL Energy Center, for Hockey News, it wasn't even for the Star Tribune, they wanted me to do sort of like the, I guess it was like first of its kind, the oral history. Wanted me to sit down with Gabby and what are you thinking on every one of the goals? And so I literally on YouTube on my laptop, we're sitting in one of the rooms next to the locker room at XL Energy Center. He and I are sitting down watching his 5-goal game. And by goal number 4, he's like almost in tears. Like it was, he was just so inspired about what he was seeing and, kind of going through it specifically. And so that's another positive story, Gabby, that I wrote on him. But the thing is that the last year of Gabby in Minnesota was a very tense season, tumultuous. You remember very early in the season, October, it was Cal Clutterbuck's NHL debut, and he never left because Gabby is playing the soccer hacky sack game and pulls his groin. And essentially knocked him out for most of the season. And then in December of that year, and I still remember this to the day, sitting on my couch in downtown Minneapolis and talking to Gaborik on the phone, and then talking to Riseborough on the phone, and then talking to Gaborik late at night too. Real tense back and forth. But Gaborik decided to go to Vail and have surgery on his hip, and this was something the Wild did not feel was a necessary operation. They felt he was doing it to improve his own stock going into his free agent year. And so there was a lot of tenseness, and I was writing the sort of the play-by-play between this with Riseborough and the Wild and Gabby, and that, remember, he's out until then March, and then so that created a lot of tenseness, and Gabby wasn't exactly pleased with how it was being portrayed to the fans here. And then he came back around the trade deadline. The Wild were sort of felt that he came back just to, again, show everybody that he could score to improve his value in free agency. Gaborik, if you look at that year that this happened in 2008-9, had an absolutely exploded those final 12, 13 games where he just, again, showed what kind of a world-class player he was. Riseborough gets fired. Then all of a sudden, the contract, the way that it's always been explained to me, is that the contract that Gaborik turned down from the Wild the summer before, which was something like 10 years, $80 million, all of a sudden his agents said to Chuck Fletcher, all right, we'll take it now. And Chuck's like, well, I can't give you $80 million over 10 years when you just missed 3/4 of the season. And then he left, went to free agency, signed with the Rangers, and then Chuck made one of the worst moves he's ever made as Wild GM, and he compensated by going and getting Marty Havlat, which was just a disaster. But so that whole year, it wasn't happy. Gabby wasn't happy with just the coverage that he was receiving. So I think that still is in his head. There's no doubt about it.
I was lucky when I was covering the Vikings, mostly as a columnist, that I hit it off with Chad Greenway. He was always just a good guy to talk to. You could talk to him as a down-to-earth human being as well as being somebody you could interview a lot. So it's really cool that his company is now sponsoring this show and the network, Gray Duck Vodka. Homegrown vodka made from the fields of the Midwest. Sounds good to me. It's also known as Minnesota's vodka. And like I said, the cool thing for me is that I've always liked and respected Chad a lot. It's really cool to be working with him again. So check out this ad.
Free too, right? I think.
Pardon me?
I think it's gluten free.
It is gluten free, which I really appreciate.
When we asked you to get the duck out, wow, did you respond? Gray Duck Vodka is now in over 1,500 locations and expanding every day. This is Chad Greenway, and I just want to say thank you for making Gray Duck Minnesota's vodka. With the wonderful ingredients from Minnesota farmers, Gray Duck is gluten-free and has won 3 gold medals for taste. For all upcoming events and a list of